Hello, my fellow Martians. I come to you today with a review of Lieutenant Gulliver Jones, His Vacation, or more to the point, as it was republished as Gulliver of Mars, a 1905 novel by Edwin Lester Arnold, a British author. This is actually his last published work. And how I came to this was in one of my reviews of Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom novels, all starring a lot of them starring John Carter of Mars, John Carter of Virginia, who's transported to Mars in this kind of fantasy setting. The first novel being, I think it's 1917, 19, something like that, 1915. He has great swashbuckling adventures. Now, in one of those reviews, a fellow Joonbug Films said, "Hey, have you read Gulliver of Mars? It might be kind of an interesting kind of a side trip to take when kind of reviewing, looking at all the Barsoom novels." And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And as I kind of picked it up, I was like, oh, this sounds very interesting. It's a book that shares a lot of commonalities with the books published later, and I'll get back to that. But so yeah, this is a review of Gulliver of Mars. Thank you, Joonbug Films. I'll put a link to his channel down below. So yes, Lieutenant Gulliver Jones is in New York. He's trying to get a promotion. He comes upon a fellow suddenly kind of seems to come upon him, dropped on a street corner, trips, falls, dies, whacks his back of his head and dies, and he's left with this guy's carpet that's also on the street beside him. There's some sort of, he gets back home, he's pretty despondent, he's got a fiance, prospects aren't looking good, and he goes, "I wish I were on Mars," at which point this carpet swoops him up, wraps him up in the carpet nice and tight, and transports him to Mars, deposits him on Mars, where he ends up colliding into this big crowd of festive of slender kind of festival folk who are just kind of like lounging about. And the one that he particularly clashes into is this person, Anne, who he gets to know. And it turns out, after a good couple of chapters of assuming Anne was a boy, it turns out Anne is neither male nor female. And though this is Gulliver Jones of America in 1905, so he just goes, "Nope, you must be a girl." So from then on, he calls her Anne. She. I think I'll call her they, just for the purposes of this review, because I don't think Anne ever actually consents to male or female. There are males and females of these residents of the city Seth. I think they're the Hither folk. But there's also these golden robed people who are basically kind of do all this kind of the serving, all the kind of the necessary goods for these very kind of lazy, wan, kind of drugged out, kind of hippie folk. But Anne is of this class where they say that they have been kind of cursed by the gods and are neither male nor female, but they might be able to love, and they look at Gulliver in a kind of a significant kind of way when they say that. So yes, he gets into this society. He meets Hath, the ruler, who is a very kind of wan, kind of serious looking fellow, or maybe the only kind of serious looking fellow of the thing. And of course, because it is a Martian romance, there is Princess Haru, who he kind of gets entangled with. Now, these folk in this particular thing are very, as I said, kind of druggy, kind of wan, kind of feminine. Even the most kind of even the males are very kind of like wan and feminine and kind of timid and like lazy, and like, there's a messenger who's like, I just kind of lay down here and I figured you'd come by eventually. Do I have to take the message back, or could you take it back yourself? It's sort of that kind of an attitude. This apparently was once a great civilization, but they're now living basically just sort of in the ruins of this city, they're a shrunken race. They don't really do anything anymore. And indeed, as the book goes on, you find out that they've actually been sort of semi-conquered and now have to give a tribute to these woodman folk, the thither folk. I think I got the hither and the thither folk thing, but these woodmen, where basically seem to be like kind of hairy, kind of Conan types. They have to give tributes. Now, it's a very communal society. The people in Seth, none of them have last names, because why would you want to impose even a last name on somebody to have to remember? They don't have mothers or fathers. They just like, well, why would I bother with a mother or father? It's very kind of communal, communist kind of thing. They have group weddings, and indeed, Gulliver ends up at one of these group weddings and is married off, but it's not like, it's kind of like as he says, well, you'd woo someone and you could fight for them and all that sort of he's a brash macho American dude, but it's like, oh no, here we just kind of do a lottery thing, and like, hopefully it'll work out, and if it doesn't, well, we can just always swap it around again, it's nothing. And he's like, that's kind of odd. And he's like, well, but if I loved Haru, it's like, I wouldn't let anyone take her away from me, I'd fight for her, which is going to come back later, because very soon after the wedding, the woodmen come for the tribute, and one of their tributes is each year they take the most beautiful woman of the city, and surprise, surprise, who's this year? It's Princess Haru, and basically the rest of the novel is a kind of a princess in peril novel, where he's got to take a very long journey where he's kind of visiting place after place, and to try and rescue her. There is a voyage down a river of the dead, which might sound familiar if you've done Princess of Mars. There's even the planet itself almost seems to be in peril. It's going to die. Everyone is just basically dying of heat and dying of thirst, which might sound familiar to the end of Princess of Mars as well. It's these interesting little kind of these echoes, these repetitions that we're getting from this earlier work that do show up in Princess of Mars. But I'll come back to that later, because I'm not. Please don't take this as me accusing anybody of plagiarism at this point, or how would I know, anyways. But yeah, so it is an interesting novel. I might as well actually just sort of say, like, this has been given as one thing of an inspiration for Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom novels, which, if you haven't seen my other reviews, yes, John Carter Goes to Mars. There is Deja Thoris, who does get in peril. There is a river of the dead, which I can't even remember. This might not be actually the one where he goes down the thing, and he makes discoveries. There's much less of a kind of a shocking discovery in this one. At the end of Princess of Mars, there is sort of the threat of annihilation of the planet. And indeed, both books have Mars as kind of a decaying, dying planet. This seems to be this theme of a dying planet in both books. Now, the thing with Edgar Rice Burroughs, though, is Edgar Rice Burroughs is the premier example of American pulp fiction, and what you can say about American pulp fiction is that they are action plots. They drive. They are super readable that way. They grab you and they just go. This book, I love it. I've really enjoyed it. But it is very much kind of a languid book. Starting out in the city of Seth and being in the city of Seth for a good number of chapters, it's all about just kind of the sensuality and the kind of like learning things, and this interesting relationship with Anne, who you think, oh, this is going to be kind of a major character for the book, but it's like, no, it's kind of this book is very picaresque, and at some point wanders off, and that's kind of the end of Anne. And it's like, I wanted Anne to come back because I thought they were very interesting in the kind of implications of this thing. There's a thing where they have this kind of argument over, Gulliver insisting must be male or female, and you must be female, and it's like Anne pulls out her tiny dagger and he pulls out his big sword, and you can't help thinking that's a little bit of a phallic representation there, so that might be a little bit more to Anne than maybe Gulliver in his rather simple binaries of male and female might take. So I really enjoyed that part of it. But it's like we start off with this very languid kind of group, whereas like, John Carter, he lands amongst the green Martians, and like they're warlike and they're fighting and they're just and they're savages. But in this one, it's like, it's a languid kind of dying city, and he's kind of he is the brash one in the city. And indeed, it's only later when he gets to the Woodmen, he sort of starts feeling a little bit more at home, because these are frontier folk, which, it's interesting that a British author picked an American hero for his tale to kind of go amongst these things. You get the sense of the Woodmen are from a different continent, and you get the sense of it's like there's maybe a little representation of a European kind of decadent, feminine society versus the masculine, male, vital Americans. Get kind of reflection there. This is often the kind of the case with science fiction in general, but these Martian tales that I've been kind of experiencing, it's very much it's the authors thinking about Earth but reflecting it in these kind of fantasy world of Martian life. So, I think the thing with that is it is very kind of languid, picaresque. It may not be something, and if you're not if there wasn't much of that kind of a science fiction market, I can see why this book was not a success at the time. This book did not find an authorship, and indeed this was, as I said, it was Edwin Lester Jones's last published book. He kind of gave up the writing trade, at least his novels. I'm not quite sure what else he was doing, but he kind of gave it up after this. There was no Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote this is like a 10, 11 book series of books, his Barsoom novels, and had many other things. He was the great success as a pulp fiction writer, but Lester Jones was much more. It's not a pulp fiction thing. It is much more kind of picaresque, it is indeed Gulliver's Vacation. It's got really wonderful descriptions in it. It's got wonderful ideas, but does not have the driving plot. But it's also interesting to look at this as a thing of if it was only like this book and Edgar Rice Burroughs, it's like you'd think, maybe this was kind of like, did he read this book and then pluck out ideas? But I've actually started another Martian book. This one even earlier. It's Augustus Pope's 1894 book, which is called, it's a long title here, Journey to Mars, the Wonderful World, its beauty and splendor, its mighty races and kingdoms, its final doom. That's the entire title, though Journey to Mars is probably how it gets shortened to. A book in which, yes, the hero, another sailor, goes to Mars, and where there are 3 human-like races. This is my Wikipedia scholarship mostly, because I've only gotten into the introduction of the book as I'm reading it. It's got 3 human-like races: red, yellow, and blue. There, it is kind of got a feudal society where there are duels and swordplay, and there are flying airships. So it's kind of cool because it's one of these things of I also enjoy reading we do Shake Tube on this channel every September, and I always like the month before kind of going back and reading Shakespeare's contemporaries and the people before Shakespeare. And what you find is that Shakespeare isn't this genius who is standing alone, who's creating all this stuff out of whole cloth. It's like, no, he's a guy who's very contemporary and within his conversation. And you very much get the idea that Edgar Rice Burroughs, the only way I'm comparing him to Shakespeare is the idea that he is scooping up ideas that were just percolating around at the time and making new combinations. And now he was the one who, through his popularity in pulps and his product, his the amount that he produced, he's the name that kind of like is known. I don't think Edwin Lester Jones or Augustus W. Pope are well-known writers, and indeed their creations aren't as much as, John Carter of Mars is sort of something that's percolated through. There was a not successful movie, but there was a Hollywood Disney movie made of the Barsoom novels, The Princess of Mars, probably primarily to start off with. He's resonated through, but he is the kind of the tip of that iceberg, where below there are a lot of other writers like Edwin Lester Jones and Augustus W. Pope. But yeah, I really enjoyed this because it was a different experience. You don't go into it expecting that kind of driving pulp narrative. That actually might be a positive to some people who just, would roll their eyes at that, where this is much more, you get the kind of sense of kind of like an explorer, or it's a sailor who's kind of going off on his voyages, on another voyage. It just happens to be a voyage on a planet. It's a book where it's a lot more sensual of a book. There's a lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs is in some ways very kind of pure. His heroes are very pure, whereas Gulliver is having relationships. There's almost kind of a toying with like, oh, something's going to happen between him and Anne. And then, with Haru, and this is all with him having a fiancée back in the thing. And indeed, I didn't actually find the ending of the book was a bit of a letdown, because it sort of just kind of tied up, and it was like, okay, yeah, we've set everything back in place, and it's kind of it felt a little too neat. There wasn't like, oh, I can see, it's not a book that ends on a cliffhanger like Princess of Mars does. Edgar Rice Burroughs was like, I'm going to make him want to come back for more. Whereas Edwin Lester Jones, for all his talents as an author, just didn't have that kind of that hooky kind of thing. And it's different authors with different aims. But yeah, I would really check this out. It's on Gutenberg, and I believe there's a copy. There's a audio of it on LibriVox. I believe there is. I don't know. I can't remember. But yeah, I would totally recommend checking this out, especially if you're a fan of Edgar Rice Burroughs. I would check this out. If you're also someone who's maybe not so much into the pulp fiction, but is into science, into kind of like more, kind of a little bit more atmospheric, kind of slightly hippie-ish, kind of hippie-ish science fiction. Actually, this is kind of like an earlier example of it, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. So thank you, Joonbug Films. This was a great suggestion. It's awesome when things like that come up, and I can kind of take advantage of that. And I will probably come back and check in with you with Journey to Mars. I'm not going to give the whole title again until I get to the review of Gustavus. I think I said it wrong. Gustavus W. Pope and his 1894 novel, because there's nothing I like more than being completely up to date and reading the latest releases. All right, more videos later.